This is Seattle's Morning News. Dave Ross with Colleen O'Brien. We like to think of America as a place where you can start at the bottom and make it to the top. We certainly see our society as much less stratified than British society. But Richard Reeves of the Brookings Institute has written a book called Dream Hoarders, and I've seen your videos too, where you shock your American audience by saying America's class system is actually more stratified than Britain's is. So explain that, and I think we need to explain when you talk about dream hoarders, the upper class, we're not talking about the 1% here. You're talking about the top 20%. So describe this group you're talking about.
So you're right. The first sort of surprising finding, if you like, is that America has this sense of being a classless society, meritocratic society. And it turns out to be more stratified, that birth is more likely to be destiny in the US than it is in the UK. So I'm escaped from a class-ridden society in Britain. I'm a new American to come to America. And then the numbers tell me that actually America's class system operates more ruthlessly, efficiently than the one that I left behind. And that is particularly true at the top. This group that we just referred to, the tops of 20%, healthy six-figure incomes. Average income of that group is about $200,000. And that group's been pulling away economically, so that's where the inequality really starts to kick in. But also just in terms of neighborhood segregation, higher education, housing wealth, you're seeing this kind of real breakaway of the group that I call the upper middle class. And some of the ways that they're actually breaking away are unfair. They're kind of opportunity hoarding mechanisms, which I kind of refer to in the book.
You're pointing out that they are being subsidized by the government and being subsidized by liberal elements in the government who you'd think would be more in favor of income equality, right?
Yeah, so when you turn to tax deductions, small ones like 529 college savings plans, which I talk about, or mortgage interest deductions and so on, one of the things that's really shocked me is that even kind of quite liberal members of the upper middle class feel quite entitled to those tax breaks. There's a sort of entitlement culture there. And I think that's because of a lack of awareness about their relative position in the distribution. And again, that's partly because you're comparing yourself to other people that you know who are also upper middle class. And so you don't feel rich because the guy next to you's got a beach house. So that's rich. So you redefine what rich is depending on who you're hanging out with. And if you're only hanging out with people of your own class, then it's easy to convince yourself that you're just, an ordinary Joe. And so you get absurd statements like that we are the 99%. As if actually that's a real description of what's happening. And you can people who are on, well into six-figure incomes, above $200,000 a year, honestly believe that they're just ordinary members of the middle class. And until we get that right, there's no chance of any other better policies.
So if the top 20% is doing this, what's happening to the bottom 80%?
Well, there's been no increase in inequality in that bottom 80%. So the gap between the poor and the middle, if you like, hasn't grown at all in the last 30 or 40 years. So the income distribution looks the same for that group. But also, they haven't seen anything like as much income growth. So since 1980, the bottom 80% have seen an increase in their combined pre-tax income about $3 trillion. For the top 20%, it's $4 trillion in the same period. So the combined number of income growth, they had more income growth in that top 20% than in the whole of the bottom 80% combined in the last 40 years. And so you're seeing this kind of big economic fracture opening up. And what that means is because it's you can't get people to move up if there aren't some people who are moving down. That's the unpopular bit of the social mobility debate. And so you're seeing this kind of glass ceiling under the kids of the rich, which is effectively a glass floor, rather, which is effectively a glass ceiling for everybody else.
And what is that? Is it going to give way?
Well, it's quite hard because if you're in the upper middle class, and many of us are, actually your self-interest kicks in here at this point. Is that why would I want to give up some of that stuff?
Is this conscious though? Just to clarify.
No, I don't think that it's not. For most people, it's not a deliberate attempt to sort of make an unfair society. And in fact, as we've just mentioned, it's quite often it's liberals in the upper middle class who are most attached to their zoning policies, to their college savings plans, to legacy preferences in college admissions, and so on and so forth. And so it's not a partisan point, actually, but so it's not the result of a kind of evil plot to create a class society. But when you look at the way the tax subsidy interacts with housing wealth and neighborhood allocation of schools and zoning policies, no one designed this to be this class stratification system, but if they had, they would have struggled to do a better job. So it's not the result of evil geniuses plotting to grind the faces of everybody else.
But there is some disingenuousness going on, though, right? Because you have, in this town, for example, progressives are relentlessly hammering away at how we have to lower housing prices so people don't have to live under bridges. But this is coming from the same people who are living in single-family craftsman homes on Queen Anne and would raise hell if you tried to rezone that for apartment buildings.
Yes, and that, in fact, Seattle's a great example because in 2014 there was a task force appointed by the mayor to look at affordable housing, and one of the proposals was to actually have more inclusionary zoning to allow in some more duplexes and triplexes into these areas which are single-family zoned. And I think he had to kill it within a week of it coming out because it creates such pushback for exactly the reason you just identified. And so the thing is that for liberal members of the upper middle class, they see inequality as quite a distant problem. It's about other people, the super rich or the poor, and it's about distant institutions. So I'll vote for, a healthcare system. It's about these kind of distant things. Actually, I think it's quite intimate. It's actually about our neighborhoods. It's actually about our schools. It's actually about our organizations. It's actually about personal decisions. So I'm personalizing the issue of inequality in the book in a way that's quite difficult for some people to accept.
Then what should be the response of an upper middle class family in these neighborhoods? It sounds like you want us to spread the wealth.
Yes, I do. I wanted to spread the wealth.
But how? How do you do that in a system that's set up for you to keep it yourself?
I mean, first of all, I do think that the conversation about tax and tax reform, which has been going nowhere forever, is partly killed by the fact that the beneficiaries of the absurd complexities are the upper middle class.
And often we don't know where our tax dollars are going. We don't think it's spent well.
Right. So the same with housing, right? Which is like, how do you feel about your neighborhood? Why would you want more inclusionary zoning in your neighborhood if you think even at the margins it might threaten your house value, which it probably won't? It'll probably mean your school's a bit more integrated economically than it was before. Why would you do that? And the truth is that from a purely self-interested point of view, you shouldn't. And so I am actually being very explicit about the fact that I'm asking people to do some things which are not immediately in their own self-interest if they are actually serious about fairness in American society.
Can I ask you this, though?
I don't think the other strategies worked of pretending that it will be in your self-interest.
In defense of the upper 20%, the lower 80% could outvote them anytime they wanted to, and they steadfastly refuse. When you ask the people in the classes that are being disadvantaged by this stratification what they don't want higher taxes on rich people.
No.
And so, I mean, what do you do?
Yeah, and I think that, well, it's interesting that in the most recent presidential election, the top 20% broke for Hillary Clinton. They broke Democrat, which is a not in the usual historical run, tends to break slightly Republican or evenly. They broke Democrat. So actually, the upper middle class were voting for more of the policies that would redistribute than the 80% who would benefit from those policies. And you're right that actually what happens is, in the hands of a skillful populist politician, you can take some of the anger that people are feeling in that kind of bottom 80% and misdirect it in such a way as to support policies that will actually end up hurting them. So, okay, so could we build a political coalition among the 80% that would say, okay, we're coming for that. We're going to make you give up some of your money and redistribute it? Yes. What's the evidence that that's been successful in the last 10, 15, 20 years of U.S. political history?
Well, Bernie Sanders tried. I mean, it failed.
We'd be having a different conversation if Bernie Sanders was president now, wouldn't we? But didn't win the Democrat nomination. So it's there in American politics. But I have come to believe that actually this has got to be the upper middle class, who, after all, run every radio station, every think tank, every news. They're the influencing class. Actually, they've got to step up. I think we can't wait for a successful working class politics.
It sounds to me at the very bottom that you're having a hard time even convincing people who make $200,000 are rich. So if you can't convince those people they're rich, then how are you ever going to make this plan work?
Well, you're right. If you can't do the first one of those, then you can't do the second. So it does require people to actually recognize where they are in the income distribution and to recognize that they are rich. And then you create the space which say, given that you're rich, you can afford to pay more tax and you can afford to give up some stuff. The trouble is, as we said, people just compare themselves to other people who are richer than themselves. And so part of my purpose here is to try and kind of interrupt our own narrative about ourselves, which is that I'm not rich, or if I am, it's only because of my own brilliance and hard work. America's a meritocracy, so it must be my awesomeness that's led to my...
I worked hard.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I should get to keep all this. So I'm trying to disrupt those myths because they have become myths that stand in the way of progress rather than supporting it.
Does charity work, or do you really have to change just the tax structure to even this out?
I think you can do, but I think it's both. I think we do need the tax system too. We need public policy, but there's lots that people can do at individual level too. So just for example, I've just been I'm lobbying my own school PTA, a relatively affluent area, to split their funds with a school that has no money from the PTA. I know other schools that have done that, are kind of split the difference PTA approach. So yes, I want to fund my kids' school, but PTA funding has become a big issue in inequality. So let's give half of it away and give it to a school that can't raise any money. That's not a law. That's not a policy. That's people just actually stepping up and saying, look, we actually need to do something too. So those are the sorts of things you can do in individual. That kind of charity works. The problem at the moment is the charitable deduction in the tax system. It just goes to these massive Ivy League institutions and endowments and stuff like that. So, it depends what we're talking about in terms of charity. There's a lot of, quote, charities in the US that don't look very charitable to me. They look like incredibly wealthy private institutions.
Talk about the home mortgage deduction, because that's one of the things that would help equality. But I think you're absolutely right. There's nobody in the top 20% wants to get rid of that.
No, because it's so valuable to them. Almost all the value of the mortgage interest deduction does go to people in that top 20%. So they've come to really like it. And it'll be difficult. And even capping it was proved impossible. I mean, Obama wanted to just cap the benefits of it. Even that became politically impossible. And so that's partly why I'm making this argument, was that even before you get to that point of trying to do the policy, you've got to get this group to realize that they're better off than that they think, and that they should be willing to give up some for others. And then you can have a conversation about mortgage interest deduction. Otherwise, others would just feel like you're just spitting in the wind the whole time. Policy after policy after policy, it fails. Even the 529 college savings plan, it's going to cost us $30 billion over the next 10 years. We couldn't be wasting that money in any, it couldn't be spending it in a more wasteful way. It's unbelievable, like, handout. And yet the upper middle class feel like they deserve it in some way.
If this continues, what's going to happen?
My fear is that the separation of the American upper middle class and the perpetuation of its status across generations, this kind of calcification, solidification of the class system, actually will end up kind of locking itself in. Because what will happen then is that the people in that class only are with people of their class. So their reference point is only themselves. So they're harder and harder to persuade that they're rich, because the only people they know are rich. So they don't think they're rich. And that our school systems, our higher education systems, our neighborhoods will become increasingly segregated. And then support for redistributive policies are likely to go down, because after all, they'll never need them. They won't benefit from them. On the other hand, the election of Trump and the moment we're in now may be actually causing some necessary introspection on the part of the American upper middle class, which is, okay, what is actually going on in my country? Why are people angry? What's going on? And maybe thinking a bit more about their own moral stance and their own contribution to the problem of inequality, and looking in the mirror a little bit. And rather than looking for somebody else to blame for inequality, starting to look at ourselves and saying, you know what, maybe I'm a bit to blame too. And that's a necessary precursor to progress. So look, the jury's out. I'm both pessimistic and optimistic. Ask me on a different day, and I'll give you a different answer depending on my
Let me ask you this. Have other countries, do we have any historical precedents to look at to see where this might lead? What it might actually look like if we let it calcify and it goes too far, and the bottom 80% finally wake up and do something about it?
Well, I think you'd have to kind of reach. There's a good way in which that can happen in the UK in the middle of the 20th century, where I come from, where actually post World War II, you're kind of building a welfare state off the back of the votes of the people who voted Churchill out and voted in a government who then basically put in the welfare state and got rid of things like legacy preferences. So said, look, we are a class divided society. We need to do something about that, and that kind of sowed the seeds for the welfare state. I think that you can look at other countries, including places. Again, I'm drawing kind of on European examples. Places like Italy, where the class system is much more calcified. And if you want to go all the way back, and it depends how historical you want to get, the fall of Venice as a trading island, that happened because they basically sealed off the class at the top. They prevented upward mobility.
This is what I'm getting at.
And it killed commerce, and it killed upward mobility, and Venice started to fall.
Ultimately, you neglect the bottom 80%. The upper 20% suffer at some point. Isn't that true?
It might be true. And that's the comfortable argument to make. And down the road, there are all kinds of costs that might come to the top 20%. But I'm resisting that argument because I think it's too easy. I think it's just this is in your interest as well, because society, the economy will grow. But the truth is, the upper middle class are doing really well. They're doing quite nicely, thank you very much. And they're likely to continue to do really pretty well. They're not threatened by Uber type things. They're not threatened by immigration or trade or technology yet, right? They're doing pretty well, thank you very much. And so actually I think that the appeal that says, look, the appeal to self-interest, even in that long runway, I think it's run its course. I actually think we need to have a more difficult conversation, which is this is not necessarily in your self-interest, but you should do it anyway. That's the politics we need now.
Why are you warning America about this?
So when I came here from the sort of class-ridden Downton Abbey country of my birth, where I hated the class consciousness, the saturation of it, the snobbery, the inverse, I hate it. And I like the kind of everyday egalitarianism of kind of American interactions. And so it's actually been a very distressing journey for me to uncover through my research at Brookings and my own life that this class system here is operating as effectively as we found it is. And more importantly, that so many Americans, even those of a liberal stripe, are quite oblivious to that fact. And so it's felt like actually someone who comes from a class system who examines inequality in the US might be the right person. Plus, you know, I'm British, so people can hate me for that if they want. You know, so
But we still love your accent, so we'll listen to you.
Or maybe my accent gives me a bit of protection. So, but I'm willing to become unpopular.
It sounds like it's just human nature.
So human nature to want best for yourself, want best for your kids, etc. But we shouldn't, I think, just give up the idea that people can change the social norm around something, even if it's not kind of in their self-interest. So human nature to want the best for yourself in the same way it's kind of best for a company to want to make profits. But we do have rules against cartels. And it's human nature to want the best for your kids. But if you bribed the baseball coach to get your kid on the team, how would you feel? How would people feel about that? They'd think,
Have
no.
you been to the suburbs?
That's right. That's right. I live in the suburbs. But I know that people would react in horror to that. So what I'm saying is that, you know, or hand out an internship to your kids, as de Blasio just did in New York and so on. It's literally unthinkable in the UK. It was once thinkable, became unthinkable. Same with legacy preferences. Things that were once the social norm that everyone's doing actually become something that's shameful, something you couldn't get away with anymore. So attitudes to these things do change. And so human nature can actually be regulated by and curtailed by social norms. And actually, a lot of the people I talk to, there's a kind of dissonance between wanting the very best themselves and their kids, but also at some level wanting a fairer society. And it's that kind of collision between those moral sentiments that's the space that I'm in. Things can change, but it only changes as a result of people like us changing.
So voluntarily surrender your privilege.
Some of your privilege.
Some of you.
Let's keep it in perspective here. I'm not expecting everyone to sell their houses, go and live in poverty, etc. But
vote for an income tax once in a while.
Yeah, I think I'm asking people to pay more tax. Yes, that group, they can pay more tax. And
income tax has become all the rage in this election cycle, at least in Seattle.
You know our tax system in this state, right? No income tax is one of the most regressive in America.
Yeah.
Where the bottom 20% pay 14% of their income in taxes, and the top pay like 4%.
Yeah. Well, that's a kind of a good example, I think, of policy change that can happen. It doesn't need to be federal. It can be state, and can be local. We've talked about hyper-local things too. But I think, you know, persuading this class of people who have been doing very well over the last 20, 30 years and continue to do very well, that they can and should give up some stuff, including some money in the form of higher taxes. We have to have that conversation directly now. We can't do it by stealth. We can't do it by appeals to self-interest anymore. It just needs to be a more direct conversation, which is, you're doing well, you can pay more, you should. And have a blunter conversation about it than we've been having so far.
Well, as much as he argues for the upper 20% giving up some of their stuff, he still wants you to buy his book, which is called Dream Hoarders, How the American Upper Middle Class is Leaving Everyone Else in the Dust, Why That is a Problem, and What to Do About It. Richard Reeves from the Brookings Institution. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.